Picture this. You're walking through the blood-soaked alleys of revolutionary Paris. It's 1792. The air is thick with fear, the kind that makes your skin crawl. The guillotine has become the centerpiece of the city, dropping its blade with mechanical cruelty day after day. But among all the horror, one execution stands out. Not because it was more efficient, but because it was inhumanly savage. This is the story of Princess Marie-Thérèse Louise of Savoy-Carignan, better known as the Princesse de Lamballe. A woman whose death was so brutal, so disturbingly calculated, that even hardened revolutionaries were left speechless. And here's the kicker. She wasn't executed for some treasonous plot. No, she died for one simple, devastating reason: unshakable loyalty. Her refusal to betray her closest friend, Queen Marie Antoinette, became her death sentence. What you're about to hear is not just a horror story, it's a descent into the darkest corners of human behavior, of how love, friendship, and integrity can become fatal sins when the world goes mad. She wasn't just some noblewoman from a dusty textbook. Born into the royal house of Savoy in 1749, Marie-Thérèse lived a life that sounds like a fairy tale, until it twisted into a nightmare. At 17, she married a French prince, but it wasn't a love story, it was politics, pure and cold. Her husband, a Bourbon with a reputation for gambling, womanizing, and scandal. Within a year, he was dead, likely of syphilis, and just like that, she became a widow at 18, alone, heartbroken, and thrust into a world where power mattered more than people. She could have disappeared, retreated, married again, lived quietly, but instead, she made a choice. She devoted herself to service, to meaning, and soon she found it. In a friendship that would define her legacy and ultimately cost her life. Enter Marie Antoinette. Young Austrian, struggling to survive the suffocating world of Versailles, where every step was watched, every word criticized. She was a foreign queen in a hostile court, lonely and desperate for someone, anyone, who understood. And she found that in the Princesse de Lamballe. Their bond wasn't just convenient, it was real, deep. Two women, both burdened by grief and palace expectations, clinging to each other like lifelines. Antoinette saw in Lamballe a sister, a confidante, and she made it official. In 1774, when she became queen, Marie created a new role just for her friend, superintendent of the queen's household, the highest female office at court. With it came influence, visibility, and enemies. And oh, did those enemies multiply, as France's finances crumbled and resentment toward the monarchy grew. So did the vitriol aimed at the queen's inner circle, and who was always by the queen's side. Lamballe pamphlets painted her as a manipulator, a foreign puppet, a symbol of everything the revolution wanted to destroy. But did she run? Did she distance herself from the chaos? No, she stayed, even as the noose began to tighten. Because for her, loyalty wasn't negotiable. Imagine knowing that every day you stayed could be your last, that mobs were calling for your blood, that even your fellow nobles were fleeing the country, and still, you stay. Why? Because the queen, your friend, your soul's twin, needs you. Because to abandon her now would be to betray everything you believe in. Because some people believe in things bigger than fear. The revolution didn't start with blood. At first, there was hope, reform, maybe even peace. But that illusion shattered quickly. By 1791, everything was spiraling. The royal family's attempted escape to Varennes failed. Public opinion turned toxic. Enemies multiplied. Executions began. Friends begged the princess to leave France while she still could. She had powerful foreign relatives. She could have vanished into safety. But again, she refused, because loyalty for her wasn't just a virtue, it was her entire identity. And that decision would lead her to a prison cell, a bloodthirsty mob, and a death so horrific it would echo across Europe for centuries. That's where we're headed next. In part 2, we'll follow the Princesse de Lamballe into the belly of the beast, the prison at La Force. We'll uncover the chilling days leading up to her murder and the impossible choices she faced. But let me ask you something before we go. If you knew that standing by your best friend could mean your own death, would you still do it? Think about it, because she did. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're a noble woman, raised in opulence, adored by royalty. You've dined with kings, walked through gold-lined halls, worn gowns stitched with diamonds, and now you're sitting on a cold, filthy floor in La Force prison, crammed beside pickpockets, drunkards, and the damned. The smell of rot and sweat fills your lungs. There's no light, no comfort, and no mercy. This is where the Princesse de Lamballe found herself in August 1792. Not because she had plotted against the people, not because she had raised a sword, but because she wouldn't betray her friend. August 10th, 1792, the gates of the Tuileries Palace explode open. Swiss guards are butchered in the streets. The king and queen are dragged away. The monarchy, the ancient, immovable pillar of France, crumbles before the roar of the revolution. And Lamballe, she's still there, still beside Marie Antoinette, still refusing to run. She's arrested just days later and thrown into La Force, one of the most dreaded prisons in all of Paris. Let's be clear, this was no ordinary jail. It was a hellhole, cramped, overcrowded, infested, a place where hope came to die. And for someone like the princess, it was more than punishment, it was humiliation. But through it all, she never complained, never begged, never broke. Her cellmates would later speak in whispers of her grace, her kindness, her prayers. Even with nothing, she still gave. Food, words of comfort. Calm when everything screamed chaos. The revolutionaries had a plan for her. They didn't just want her locked away, they wanted to use her. If they could get the princess to testify against the queen, they'd deal a devastating blow to Marie Antoinette's already collapsing world. So they tried. They starved her, isolated her, screamed in her face, demanded she denounce the monarchy. Just one word against the queen, and she could have walked free. But no. She stayed silent, or worse for them, loyal. Let that sink in. She's facing certain death. Her name's already scrawled on the lists of enemies of the revolution. Friends have warned her, priests have prayed for her, diplomats begged her to claim protection as a foreign-born noblewoman. All she had to do was lie, just a little, just enough to survive. But she wouldn't, because her conscience wouldn't let her, because friendship, for her, wasn't a game. It was sacred. And then came September, the month when hell opened its doors and let loose the flood. Whispers swept through the prison like wildfire. There were rumors of mass executions, that the mobs were coming, that no one would leave alive. Could the princess feel it, that growing sense of doom pressing on her chest? We don't know, but we do know this. She never asked for special treatment, never begged to be spared. She prayed, she waited. She chose honor over escape, dignity over survival. It's easy to say you'd be brave in a crisis, but imagine sitting in a dark stone room, hearing the screams from other cells, the sound of boots thundering down the halls, and knowing, with absolute certainty, that they are coming for you, and still choosing silence, still refusing to speak against the woman you love like a sister. That's not just courage, that's legendary. In part 3, we step into the bloodbath. You'll witness what happened on September 3rd, 1792, a day that burned itself into the history of human cruelty, when the mob finally reached her cell and Paris drowned in its own madness. Brace yourself, because next time we descend into the massacre and what happened to the Princesse de Lamballe, you'll never forget. September 3rd, 1792. Paris wakes up screaming. The streets are soaked in blood. The air smells of iron, sweat, and fear. Rumors spread like wildfire. The prisons are full of traitors. They'll rise up and kill us all. Panic becomes a weapon, and the weapon is handed to the mob. And then, it begins. The September massacres. Over 5 days, more than 200 people are butchered. No trials, no mercy, just steel and rage, and in the middle of it all, La Force prison. That's where the crowd heads next. That's where they know she is, the Queen's best friend, the Princesse de Lamballe. To them, she's not just another aristocrat, she's a symbol, a foreign-born, crown-worshipping parasite. Her name has been shouted in pamphlets, cursed in taverns, scrawled on wanted lists. To the mob, she isn't a woman anymore. She's an idea, and ideas don't get mercy. The prison gates are torn open, screams echo from the courtyard. The mob drags nobles out one by one, priests, dukes, former ministers, lining them up for makeshift tribunals. But let's be honest, this isn't justice, it's theatre. The verdict has already been written, guilty, the sentence, death, and now, it's her turn. They drag the Princesse de Lamballe from her cell. She's thin, pale, exhausted, but she's standing, head held high, and silent. The tribunal is a farce. They demand she take an oath, renounce the monarchy, swear loyalty to the Republic, curse Marie Antoinette by name. She refuses, not angrily, not with rage, but with calm defiance. She simply says, "I cannot say what I do not believe." That's it, one sentence, but it's enough to seal her fate. They don't wait for formalities. She's yanked outside into the courtyard. And what happens next? It's hard to even put into words. They strip her, beat her, defile her. Clubs, stones, fists, all crashing down with grotesque rhythm. It's not a killing. It's an execution of identity, a performance of hatred, and she's the unwilling star. Witnesses, and yes, there were many, describe it in detail. She's mutilated, her body dismembered, her head cut off with horrifying ritual. Some say her heart was torn out and eaten. Others claim her genitals were paraded through the street. Whether every one of those details is literal or symbolic doesn't matter anymore, because the truth is already unbearable. This wasn't just about death, it was about erasure. A message. This is what we do to those who stay loyal to tyrants. But it gets worse. Her severed head is mounted on a pike. The mob combs her hair, applies rouge to her cheeks, paints a smile on her lips. They aren't done. They want to show it to Marie Antoinette. Yes, they march to the temple prison where the queen is locked away. They demand she look out the window. "See what we did to your little lamb." She sees, she faints, and something inside her breaks. Let that settle for a moment. This wasn't just murder. This was psychological warfare, a direct strike to the Queen's heart. The revolution didn't just kill a princess that day. It reached through prison walls into Marie Antoinette's soul and shattered it. And yet, even in this horror, something remains. The Princesse de Lamballe didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't betray. She stood by her friend to the very end. And that's something no mob could destroy. In Part 4, we deal with the aftermath. What did the revolution gain by unleashing this nightmare? How did the world react? And why, centuries later, are we still haunted by her death? Because this wasn't just history. It was a warning, and maybe, just maybe, a martyrdom. So what happens when a crowd murders a princess? What happens when they parade her head through the streets like a trophy? Do they stop, reflect, regret? No. They celebrate September 3rd, 1792, the day Paris lost its mind, and lost something else too, its soul. After the Princesse de Lamballe was torn apart, and I mean that literally, her remains didn't get peace. They got turned into props in a grotesque street play, her head on a pike, her bloodied body hacked to pieces, her organs rumored to be eaten, her hair combed, face rouged, her beauty mocked in death. And then the mob began its procession. They marched through the city, roaring songs of the revolution, waving the pike like it was a flag of victory. Through crowded alleys, past stunned shopkeepers, right to the Temple prison where Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, was locked away with her children and a fading sliver of hope. And there they demanded she come to the window. Look at your friend now. When the Queen saw what they'd done, saw that familiar face twisted into a lifeless mask, she collapsed. Some say she screamed, others say she fainted dead away. But everyone agrees. Something inside her died that day too. You see, this wasn't just about revenge. It was a message, a warning, a performance, and it worked. Marie Antoinette would never be the same, but it didn't stop there. The mob didn't bury the body. They continued the parade, bar to bar, square to square, passing the severed head around like a perverse relic. Eyewitnesses say they laughed, toasted, took turns holding it up like a prize hog. This wasn't just violence anymore, it was entertainment. And that's what makes it so horrifying. Not just the act itself, but how ordinary people, bakers, butchers, tailors, got drunk on blood and called it patriotism. Meanwhile, in Versailles, London, Vienna, shockwaves rippled through the royal courts of Europe. Even for the blood-soaked French Revolution, this was too much. Foreign diplomats wrote furious dispatches, artists painted her final moments, pamphlets called her a martyr, and suddenly, the revolution that claimed to stand for liberté, égalité, fraternité looked a lot more like something ancient and unrecognizable. Barbarism. Inside France, even some revolutionaries recoiled. We wanted justice, they whispered, but this. Still, none of the ringleaders condemned it. Not Marat, not Danton, not Robespierre. In fact, many praised it. Revolutionary justice, they called it, a necessary purge. But make no mistake, what happened to the Princesse de Lamballe wasn't justice. It was terror, wrapped in politics, fueled by fear, executed by mob rule, and celebrated with wine and song. And the Queen, she lived with the memory, every day, every night. That pike, that head, that moment burned into her soul. She had already lost her throne, her freedom, her safety. Now she had lost her heart in the cruelest way possible. In Part 5, we follow the echoes, how Lamballe's death reshaped France's image around the world, how her murder changed the course of the revolution, and why some saw her not as a victim, but a warning. The guillotine would keep falling, but it would never again strike a blow quite this cruel. When the mobs of Paris silenced the Princesse de Lamballe, they thought they were killing a symbol of the old regime. What they didn't realize, they were creating a legend. Because her death didn't vanish into the noise of the revolution. It exploded across Europe, from London to Vienna, from Naples to Berlin. The reports spread like wildfire. Gory, detailed, and impossible to ignore. Pamphlets, paintings, rumors, everyone heard about the princess with her head on a pike. And suddenly, France wasn't a brave new republic fighting for liberty. It was a nation gone mad. Foreign ambassadors wrote in horror, "Even savages do not treat women this way. This is not revolution, it is bloodlust." And monarchs, they were watching closely. The kings and queens of Europe, already wary of the revolutionary fever creeping across borders, now had proof of what it could lead to. Public executions, sexual mutilation, heads in the streets. If this could happen to a noblewoman with royal ties, what chance did they have? So they acted. Within months, a coalition of European powers began forming to crush the French Revolution. Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, Spain, Naples, and yes, Lamballe's home house, Savoy, where her relatives grieved not just a woman, but an insult to their name. Her death became political fuel. It helped justify war. It hardened positions. It made peace seem impossible. You could argue, and many historians do, that the brutality of her execution helped trigger years of continental bloodshed. And inside France, it did something else. It marked a turning point. See, the revolution hadn't started this way. It began with speeches, declarations, dreams of justice and liberty. But now it was mobs ripping people apart in courtyards. Now it was children watching heads go by on sticks. Even some radicals, those who once cheered for the fall of the monarchy, paused. "What are we becoming?" they whispered. But it was too late. The machine had started, and it didn't slow down. It sped up. Within a year, the reign of terror would begin. The guillotine would rise like a god over Paris. And the Princesse de Lamballe, she became a cautionary tale. To the revolutionaries, a symbol of what happens when you cling to the past. To royalists, a martyr, sacrificed not for politics, but for loyalty. To the world, a chilling reminder that revolutions don't just devour kings, they devour friends, women, innocence, and even memory. Her story was written in blood, but it didn't fade. It echoed through war, through history books, through portraits and novels, through whispered prayers, because her death asked a question that still haunts us. What happens to humanity when vengeance becomes virtue? In Part 6, we go deeper into that question. How the death of one woman helped redefine the meaning of political loyalty, personal sacrifice, and the terrifying psychology of the mob. If you think you've seen the worst, think again. So let's ask the question no one wants to ask. How does something like this happen? How do ordinary people, merchants, blacksmiths, seamstresses, turn into monsters? How do they cheer while a woman is torn apart in a public courtyard? Here's the terrifying truth. It doesn't happen all at once. The execution of Princesse de Lamballe wasn't a random act of madness. It was the logical conclusion of months, years of fear, rage, propaganda, and pain. The people of France had been starving, taxed into oblivion, ignored by their kings, lied to by their priests, used as pawns in a centuries-old aristocratic game. And when the dam broke, it broke hard. But even then, even in a time of violence, this went further. Because what the mob did to the princess wasn't just murder. It was symbolic erasure. They didn't just want her gone, they wanted to destroy the idea of her loyalty, her grace, her quiet strength, her connection to the queen. To kill Lamballe was to kill the heart of the monarchy, and to make Marie Antoinette feel it in her bones. Let's be real. If the princess had begged for mercy, renounced the queen, cursed the monarchy, they might have let her live. But she didn't. She stood there, quiet and unwavering, and said no. No to betrayal, no to fear, no to survival bought at the price of her soul. And that's what enraged them most, because in that moment she reminded them, all of them, of what they had become. She held up a mirror, and they smashed it. That's the thing about mobs. They don't just kill people, they kill symbols, they kill clarity. They operate in that space where no one feels responsible, because everyone is. No single person mutilated the princess. But the mob did, and that is far more terrifying. The revolution by this point had begun devouring itself. Radicals turned on moderates, neighbors turned on neighbors. The guillotine didn't rest, it just changed names on the list. Danton would die, Robespierre too. The very people who lit the fire were eventually burned by it. But the Princesse de Lamballe, she became something else entirely. Her story began to spread in whispers. Among royalists, she died for honor. Among priests, she died for faith. Among commoners, she died for nothing and everything. And even those who hated the crown couldn't deny what was done to her was evil. But here's what makes her story eternal. She didn't fight, she didn't argue, she didn't run, she simply refused to betray. And in that refusal, she became a symbol of something the revolution couldn't destroy. Loyalty without violence, courage without pride, faith without fanaticism. There's a reason she still haunts history books, not because of how she died, but because of how she lived in her final moments. In Part 7, we arrive at the end of this journey. We ask the hardest question of all. Was it worth it? What did her death mean? Not just for history, but for us. Because the story of the Princesse de Lamballe is not just a tragedy. It's a challenge. So now we've reached the end. The story has been told. The blood has dried. The head is off the pike. The crowds have dispersed. And what's left? One question. Was it worth it? Was loyalty worth dying for? Was refusing to denounce a friend worth being torn to pieces? Was standing firm in a crumbling world anything more than beautiful suicide? Let's be honest, in practical terms, no. The Princesse de Lamballe's death didn't stop the reign of terror. It didn't save the Queen. It didn't inspire a counter-revolution. If anything, it helped ignite even greater violence. She died, and the machine kept turning. The guillotine didn't pause, the prisons didn't empty, the fear didn't stop spreading. So if we're looking for impact, strategy, results, revolution math, then her death was meaningless. But history isn't just made of causes and effects, it's made of moments. And this one, it still echoes, because while the world may not remember every revolutionary, every pamphlet, every law, it remembers her. It remembers a woman who had every chance to flee and didn't. A woman who could have saved herself with a lie and didn't. She didn't shout, she didn't fight, she just said no. And that no, whispered with calm, spoken with dignity, screamed louder than 100 mobs. That's what makes her story matter. Not because she changed the course of history, but because she revealed something about it. She showed us that when everything falls apart, when loyalty becomes dangerous, when faith becomes treason, when friendship is a death sentence, some people still hold the line. Not because they expect victory, but because they can't live with betrayal, even if it costs them everything. And here's the truth that hurts the most. Civilizations collapse when people stop caring about that kind of courage. When we start calling dignity naive and sacrifice foolish. When we say survival is all that matters. But the Princesse de Lamballe reminds us that survival isn't all that matters. Sometimes how you live and how you die is the only thing that does. So was it worth it? That's not a question history can answer. It's one you have to answer. If you had been in her shoes, with the mob at the gates, the Queen in chains, and your name on the list, would you have stayed? Would you have said, I will not betray her, even knowing what was coming? Would you have faced death for love? We like to think we know ourselves, but history is full of people who thought they knew what they'd do, until the knives were drawn. The Princesse de Lamballe didn't flinch, and that's why, centuries later, we still speak her name. Not just as a victim, but as a mirror, a challenge, a standard. In the end, she died not for politics, not for titles, not even for a queen. She died for friendship, for conviction, for the belief that some things are too sacred to betray, no matter the cost. And in that sense, yes, it was worth it.